Hello there, kia ora. Over the weekend, chances are you heard about Hui a Motu, which was the big hui being held at Turanga Waiwai Marae down in Narua, Wahia. 10,000 people attended the event in person, up to 40,000 people apparently streamed it online. It was really, really big. And I missed it because I was working over the weekend. My thought process was it's a really big event. There'll be some post event analysis on our mainstream media sites that I can look into on the Monday morning. And boy, was I wrong. I mean, the Herald literally had nothing on their front page about it at all. Stuff only had stories buried down in its Portiaki section. There was very little on those two whatsoever. But what I did find on other mainstream media outlets was something that we have a real problem with in this country. It's called a transparency queue. It's essentially a heuristic tool that tells the audience what they're reading is either news or opinion, and that mixing of the two, the blurring of the lines, is actually a big feeder into why people distrust the media, because they might be reading something as opinion and thinking it's news. If we have a look at how this particular event was actually sort of talked about in our media afterwards, it raises some really interesting questions around how transparency queues need to work in this country. For example, One News ran this piece, which is from John Campbell. It is an opinion piece. It starts off in a first person perspective. But what they've also got on the front page is this piece, which has Shane Jones complaining about the event itself. And in fact, complaining about the event creates conflict, which is a marker a lot of gatekeepers use in deciding what is going to be news for everybody. But Shane Jones's views are still opinion. Same with the comments from David Seymour about how few people actually attended. He claims it was 0.02% of the population. It was actually 0.2% of the population. You'd hope a right wing, economically fiscal MP would be the kind of person who got his numbers and percentages right. But hey, who am I to judge? Either way, his numbers were wrong. But the viewpoints that were dissenting, which creates conflict, is what's being pushed on media. The other weird angle for media conflict on this one is actually the MPs who agreed with what was going on. Tama Potaka, the Hamilton West National Party MP, who was also the Māori development spokesperson for the party, or portfolio holder for the party, he was at the event. He found it really informative. He took a lot away from it, and he said afterwards that the treaty's principles bill that's being proposed is not the sort of thing that should be going ahead. Those are really great learning curves and good things to hear, but it still creates a sense of conflict having come out of the event because it goes in the face of what those other two spokespeople are that are coming from the government. Because as much as they might like to distance themselves over these kind of issues, ACT, New Zealand First and National are still the government together. So it's a really fascinating way of creating conflict. But at the same time, this is still his opinion. It's not necessarily news because, well, he's not going to be able to change what happens because the other parties are pushing that through. That conflict is the driver for news. And what's really fascinating is that in a context specifically to do with Aotearoa, we actually have some guidelines in place for our media called the Tiriti framework for news media. It makes media ask questions like, how is your organization exploring nation building within te ao references rather than pitting Māori versus non-Māori? Or what type of stories are you telling and choosing to tell, and how or who do these stories benefit? For something like the New Zealand Herald, they're not telling these stories at all. But for somebody who's telling the story, like Radio New Zealand, of what Tama Potaka's views are, well, that's a really different story to, say, Shane Jones sitting there complaining on TVNZ. Those choices are really important because they help us as an audience identify what people consider newsworthy, what the news outlets consider newsworthy, and what the narrative is that's being built around these events. And this is a narrative that seems to be building around conflict when there wasn't any. And that's a real problem when it comes to how our media works and how to build trust in our media.